Hey guys, I'm Dan from ShastaBubba Adventures, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the Locus Gear Khufu in DCF and the matching net tent in Sil Nylon. I'm going to tell you everything you want to know about this shelter, and also this is going to be a long-term review because I've actually been using this setup over 3 full backpacking seasons. I've taken it on trips from Glacier National Park in Montana all the way down to the Wind River Range in Wyoming, and I'd estimate I've had it out over 30 plus nights and probably hiked about 700 miles. So I'm going to walk you through all the pros and cons and give you my impressions of how it's holding up over that time. Okay, let's get into it. The Khufu is made of DCF 8, which is just about the thickest you commonly see in these types of shelters, and weighs a bit less than 12 ounces. Rather than overwhelm you with rattling off a whole bunch of numbers, I'll just put the dimensions on the screen here. As you can see, it's a pyramid-shaped shelter, what most people simply refer to as a mid, and this is generally considered the best all-around shape for protection from the elements. 360-degree wind protection, rain slides right off with no pooling, and snow usually doesn't stick to the steep walls, unlike a more traditional dome-shaped tent that tends to create some nearly flat spots on the top. The Khufu requires a minimum of 4 stakes, 1 on each corner, which is great if you need to throw up a shelter quickly to dodge an approaching storm. However, most times you will want to use 8 stakes to pull out the side panel tie-outs, which provides more room inside as well as less flapping in the wind. It can also be pitched with 1 pole in the center, but I prefer to use 2 poles in this inverted V shape. That way I don't have to dodge the pole in the middle, and it allows me to be closer to the center instead. As you can see here, when pitching with just the mid, I use a Tyvek ground cloth. This is cut in the shape of a capital P, but flipped backwards, so there's a place close by for me to put gear I want to access during the night, like my headlamp, the clock, or bear spray. Locus Gear sells this 2-pole adapter called a DPTE, which stands for Dual Trekking Pole Extender, and you can get this with either aluminum or carbon fiber poles. These are carbon fiber and weigh 3 ounces. Now the kit also comes with this cup and string attachment, which is intended to keep the trekking pole grips from sliding apart, although I personally have never actually used or needed them. In the nights, all the nights I've slept in the Khufu, the poles have never migrated apart during the night. The tension of the guy lines seems to keep them in place just fine. The side panels have small bungee strings, which I attached myself. By the way, I got the bungee string from Z-Packs, and that reduces stress on those rather vulnerable tie-out patches. I like to run the string continuously from the side pull-out to the bottom here, and that allows me to tension both places with just 1 stake. Incidentally, I replaced all the guide lines with reflective glow wire from Lawson Equipment, and I'll put a link to them in the description below. This stuff is practically indestructible, and there is a reflective thread woven in so the strings shine when your headlight hits them at night, which is great to keep from tripping over them in the dark. As you can see, there is a vent up top to reduce condensation. Personally, I'm a little skeptical about the value of these top vents, considering that pitching the shelter high enough to allow airflow down low does way more for managing condensation. But I have no way of really evaluating that. It's just a hunch that it doesn't really do much. Also, Locus Gear put a bug mesh over the opening, which further reduces airflow and is really silly in a shelter that's open at the bottom. I keep meaning to cut that out, but I never seem to remember when I'm home and have access to scissors to take care of that. Incidentally, flying bugs are less of a problem than you might think with this type of shelter. When you set up the tent over a patch of ground in the woods, there are just naturally insects in the grass and brush already, and they are disturbed in the process of setting up camp and they get airborne. But they always seem to rise along the walls and stay up in the top of the mid. It's a funny thing, but they don't really bother someone sleeping down here. And that's another reason to remove the bug mesh over the vent, just to allow an exit for the bugs. They've added a cord with a tensioner here to keep the vent from flapping loosely in high winds, although I think it would take some pretty extreme wind for that to be much help. And that's another thing I should probably remove because I never even think to use it, and it does kind of get in the way with the zipper. Speaking of which, there is a number 3 AquaGuard zipper, and since it's waterproof, there's no need for an extra flap covering the zipper, which is great because those flaps always seem to get caught in the zipper. The number 3 zipper is a trade-off because it's lighter than the more typical number 5 used by other companies, but potentially less durable. And that's why I wanted to especially show up close that after 3 seasons, it's still in great shape. Just to give some context, I take good care of my gear, but I don't really baby it. And this has been covered with mud and dirt on various trips, but still doing great. Another trade-off is the height, which is 51 inches. Now that's 5 inches less than the Mountain Laurel Designs Dual Mid, and that means that the downside is that less height in the peak means that the walls are less steep, and so slightly less room inside the shelter. Although that might be a problem for a really tall hiker, me at 6 feet, I can sit up inside it and not have any issues at all. The benefit of a shorter peak is that it allows the Khufu to be pitched with just one pole, as I've said, whereas the Duo Mid, you have to bring a 6-inch pole jack in order to be able to get the height that you need to pitch that with one pole. Now, I don't mean to be doing a head-to-head comparison between the Khufu and the MLD Dual Mid. That just happens to be the closest competitor with the Khufu, and it's also a shelter that I own and am very familiar with, so I'm going to be mentioning the Dual Mid a couple of times just for reference. I want to give you an idea of what it's like inside the Mid for space, and although it's generally referred to as a 2-person shelter, it would be very crowded for 2 average-sized adults, but for 1 person, as you can see, plenty of space, and there's a lot of room beside me for laying out gear when I'm able to be in the middle here. And I'll show you down low, there's a fair amount of space for feet, and a lot of times I do end up brushing up against the side with the foot box of my quilt, but that's why I have an extra layer, thicker layer on the quilt to protect from condensation. The only really significant downside of the Khufu is the cost. Now, Locus Gear is a Japanese company, and so the prices listed on their website are in yen, and so it fluctuates from time to time with the exchange rate. When I bought my Khufu in 2016, it actually was right about the same price as the MLD Dual Mid, right at about $450. Unfortunately, when I checked just yesterday to research for this video, I saw that doing the exchange rate, it's actually closer to $600 now. I don't know if that's due to the exchange rate going crazy or if DCF is skyrocketing, but that's a significant issue. Although, even though that's quite a bit more than the Dual Mid, it's still $130 less than the HMG Ultimid, so not completely outrageous for what it is. Thankfully, Locus Gear does also make a 30D sil nylon version of the Khufu, and that goes for closer to $315, so much more affordable, and the weight still is only 16.5 ounces. And they even make a version out of Tyvek that's just $260 and 15.5 ounces, although I really have no idea about the durability of that model. I'd be curious to find out. Some of the locals observing my camera work. I contacted Locus Gear while I was researching for this video to ask whether there have been any significant changes to the Khufu since I bought mine in 2016. And they reported back that the only significant change is that the seams are now fully bonded instead of taped and sewn as they were in my model. I expected to be able to make a simple statement of how that's clearly an improvement, but it turns out that how seams are joined actually is a rather controversial issue. One side says that sewing weakens the DCF, making it more prone to tearing and leaks. The other side counters that the bonding adhesives tend to weaken at severely cold temperatures, and we're talking about like around 0 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they separate. Bottom line for my research is that for the average hiker, it doesn't really seem to make much difference. Either method is fine, as you're really not likely to encounter such extremes in wind strength, long-term exposure, and low temperatures for it to matter. And the failure points of both methods seem to really only show up in tests. In researching on the internet, I wasn't able to find a single story of someone having these seams fail in the wilderness. So if you are someone who actually knows about that or have had that happen to you, please leave a comment in the comments below and let us know about that. Otherwise, it seems like it's a pretty esoteric issue. And just for reference, MLD also bonds the seams on their DCF shelters. Okay, now let's take a look at the mesh inner tent. This is the full-size model and weighs 13 ounces. It has a 30D sil nylon floor, which is more durable than DCF, and the mesh is a 0.7 ounce no seam. As you can see, it's a little tighter inside on top and bottom, but there's still tons of space for gear on the side for one person. I like to have my stuff laid out by my side at night, but Locus Gear also makes a 3/4 version, a 2/3 version, and even a 1/2 version if you really want just the bug net around you and not the gear. What's really nice for me about the full size is it still allows me to sleep in the center and gain a little extra room top and bottom. And it's fine that my feet are touching the mesh because that is now the inner wall of a double wall shelter, and the mesh actually keeps my quilt contained so I'm not brushing against the condensation on the outer wall. The inner net tent has a patch in the middle of the floor and a cup in the very top of the netting to allow you to pitch it with one pole if you desire. The Khufu has bungee tie-outs to hold the doors open, and the mesh tent also has tie-outs on both sides. The Khufu has these Velcro tie-outs attached to the inside of the mid, and those are for connecting to the upright poles when they are pitched in that inverted V shape. However, I find that I rarely use them because I like to pitch the mid so high, it's usually so far away that they really don't reach. But that would probably be helpful if it was a really windy night and I was pitched low to the ground. That would help certainly with some of the flapping. One big advantage of this configuration is that it's great for pitching in the rain, because the mid goes up first, then the inner tent is inside and protected as you work on raising that. As you can probably tell by now, I am really happy with the Khufu. Other than a few little nits, the only significant criticism is the price, which is often the case at this level of high-tech ultralight gear. I've been in this shelter in some really heavy rains and windstorms, and it's taken very good care of me. So after 3 years of use, there's very little signs of wear, so I really can wholeheartedly highly recommend the Khufu. Now, if budget is a concern, then I certainly would recommend the sil nylon version of the Khufu or the MLD dual mid. For just 4 to 6 ounces more, you can get still bomb-proof 360 protection from anything nature can throw at you, but in a much more affordable price. Hey, if this was useful, please hit that like button, and even better, please subscribe. If you subscribe, that just allows you to make sure you don't miss out on any of the good stuff coming up, like the next video that'll be all about how to pitch a mid, and even more, it helps me to continue making these videos. So please be a pal, smash that subscribe button, and we'll all be happy. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.